I was diagnosed in 1959 after a tonsil operation that went wrong. And at the time, the matron there was totally unsympathetic. When I started going on injections, she glared at me and said, "Oh, you'll have to have these injections for the rest of your life." Now, I've basically endured that. A couple of years later, because of the diabetes, I also developed epilepsy. So all my life, I just endured these injections. Now, all I'm asking, is there any hope for people like me who've had diabetes over 60 years and have basically just got fed up with it?
Yeah, very good question. I think everyone gets fed up with it many, many times over. I think you're absolutely right. So, at the moment, if you said, what could I do for you? I'm not going to say tomorrow, but we do, of course, have transplantation. We have pancreas transplantation, the whole pancreas, and we have islet transplantation as well. Now, we only use that for a small number of people, and the reason is twofold. One is we don't have that many pancreases or islets because you can't give it from a living donor, if you like. It has to be from somebody who's died. But also because at the moment, to have a pancreas transplant, you need to take pretty strong immune drugs. They have to knock your system pretty hard so that you don't reject the transplant. And that has some risks for you. And people tend to say, well, generally, if you're doing okay on insulin, it's not worth you taking that extra risk. Also, having a whole pancreas transplant is a pretty major operation. And the transplants last for about 5 to 7 years, sometimes less, sometimes more. So it's not been a routine procedure, but a couple of things that I mentioned earlier on might become available. So that's either growing your beta cells back or developing stem cells that can grow into beta cells and put those back in, and find ways of doing those with less, you'd have to take less drugs to do that. But I guess what we're saying tonight is that's a little bit behind the curve at the moment than these treatments for people who are newly diagnosed or who haven't lost their beta cells yet. Because at the moment, we don't know how to regrow the beta cells. It's better for us to prevent it rather than actually we're less skilled at intervening at your stage, Richard, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. So I'm going to work through the people who've got their hands raised. So Ziala, I think I'm going to come.
There's a few things on the chat as well, isn't there, Jamie, as well?
Yeah,
so
yes, we'll come back to those in a sec. We'll just try and work through the people who got to ask some questions. So Ziala, over to you.
Hi, my name's Zila. Sorry. I started reading a book called Mastering Diabetes, and it's by a couple of American guys who claim that if you went onto a low-fat, plant-based diet, you can reproduce your beta cells and stop that breakdown. But the diet is extremely rigid. It's literally all fruit and vegetables and rice and grains and beans and things like that. Have you got any view on that? Is it something that you've heard of as well, or what do you think? Is it possible to do a bit of that to help yourself, or what do you think?
Well, actually, I don't know so much about that diet, Zila. I know that a lot of people use carbohydrate restriction, which of course is the almost opposite of what you've just described. And I'm not I think you're on mute. You're back on mute. I can't hear you for a minute. Somebody muted you, I think.
Thank you. It's just what they were saying, that lots of people, when they're first diagnosed with diabetes, sorry to interrupt you, but are told to reduce their carbohydrates. So you naturally then take less insulin. But their sort of claim is that that's not the way to go, and you actually need carbohydrate in order for your body to function properly. That was their...
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I'm not strongly recommending carbohydrate restriction.
No.
It was the only thing, actually, 100 years ago. That's what they did. They had a sort of egg diet, and they severely restricted carbohydrate, and the kids got thinner and thinner and thinner. It was just awful. The idea that a fat-based diet could actually increase your beta cells, I don't know that I've not seen any evidence that that is being proven. Let's put it that way around. So, I think that's the best I can say. I haven't seen any sort of independent research work on that, showing that actually does work. And one of the tricky things is that the rate at which people lose their beta cells is very variable. So there's some people who 10 years later are still making loads of insulin. And the people, usually the little ones, the younger you are, the quicker it goes, who within 6 months really have nothing and very, very dependent on insulin. Missing the one dose would increase their risk of ketoacidosis, that kind of thing. They're very insulin dependent. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Like the sound of that egg diet. Sidra, coming to you.
It's not done as a standard test, but do you remember I mentioned earlier on about the clinic in Edinburgh, in fact, who tested the C-peptide in every patient that was on insulin in their clinic and found that 5% of them still had loads of it left, and actually they could come off insulin. So there's some discussion about whether people who are on lower doses of insulin with very smooth control, should it be done? I actually feel it probably should be done on people who've never had a definite diagnosis of insulin, of type 1 diabetes, because more than 5 years afterwards, it's usually at a very low level. It's still not routine, but you can ask. When I say it's not routine, every lab in the country can do it. But it's not what doctors are doing every day, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. And then just a few minutes.
Yes, beta cells are your own beta cells. And at the moment, the stem cells do make insulin, and they do switch off when sugar levels are low, but they have to do it really quickly. There's no point in something that just releases insulin 30 minutes later, 60 minutes later, doesn't release enough. These are racehorses. They have to perform really well to pump out the insulin when you need it. They also have to not have the risk of becoming cancers themselves, because sometimes when you've grown cells, there's a risk. So some of them are being put in little bags to stop them, escaping, if you like. So definitely keep an eye on that. And we hope that we'll, if you like, I'd like to think that we can get you to grow your own before we have to use the stem cells. But anything that works, go for it. Keep an eye on these different options.
No, it's really interesting you sort of adding to that, because I think all the the discourse in the media and all that sort of stuff. A lot of people have sort of taken that and run with it, and when can I get it? When can I get it? But actually, just a little more information, then it sort of changes your opinion on it slightly. Someone asking Derek actually to repeat the kilo to weight insulin units equation again.
Okay. So the simplest one is 1 unit per kilo. If you're on 1 unit per kilo or more of insulin, then in fact a lot more than that, you probably have type 2 diabetes actually, but or some degree of insulin.
Kilo weight. Is that per day, the amount of insulin you have?
Per day, total per day.
But if you are on, I'm actually doing like a sort of keto diet, which is very, very low, and I have about 20, 25, maybe 30 grams of carbohydrate a day. So I'm automatically having less. So surely that will put me in the bit that might make me type 2, or no, not type 2. I'm producing
some, yeah. Well, I wasn't taking into account. You're absolutely right, Frankie. I wasn't taking you into account. Because you're right. If you reduce your carb intake, you're going to need less insulin, and the calculation doesn't work quite so well in that situation. So I was just assuming it was on a normal carbohydrate diet.
Yeah. Okay. And one question: have you done any of these trials on people like me, touch wood, who haven't had any complications with diabetes? Is there any difference in the trials you've done, people that have had complications and those that haven't? Any better results?
Well, again, a great question. Let me answer it this way. At the moment, we don't know any genes for complications. So you might think, for example, only 1/3 of people get kidney failure, no matter how bad their sugars are. Almost everybody, if you have bad sugars for many, many years, you'll get eye problems. And if you have good sugars, you don't get eye problems. But kidney failure doesn't affect everybody. We don't know why that is. The assumption is maybe it is a gene thing, or there's other factors going on. But the other interesting thing is, and somebody mentioned it, I think, that we found that some people have held on to their insulin for very, very many years. In fact, in the States, in Boston, they have a thing called the equivalent of the diabetes medal is the Jocelyn medal. So you get this medal if you've had diabetes for 50 or 60 years. And it seems, I don't know whether this is actually true, but it seems they said you can have this medal if you give us your pancreas after you die. That's not quite true, but they did a study on the people who had many, many years of diabetes, over 60 years after they died. And the majority of them still had a few beta cells left, which was quite remarkable. So the question is whether some people, where they don't have complications, have actually held on for longer than others. And that may be part of the story.
I love my poor bellies! Oh.